All right, let me get my pencil. You know, the other things I learned, you can't compromise on how, you can't just lay the board down and then pick up your square and expect you're going to draw a line on the board. You know, because you're pushing the square against the board so much, you know what I mean, and holding so tight that it moves the board. It just doesn't work, you know. You'd have to dog it down with bench dogs, you know, or just do something like this. I mean, I think this system works fine. A few weights. What I'm doing right now is prepping up the other binder strake, and I'm cutting most of the wood off with the electric plane to make this angle for the overlap. You know, it just wouldn't serve me to use a hand plane to do this because it would be too difficult and it would move the piece around on the bench too much. This is much, much easier, much faster. Once I get it down close to the line, then I'll switch over to a hand plane after that. Basically what I'm doing here is I'm using the block plane, but I'm making sure that the blade doesn't cover both lines, the line on the edge and the line on the side, because if it did, I couldn't control it very easily. I've twisted it so the blade doesn't cover this line at all, and I'm going to plane this side only. I don't have to pay attention to that at all. All I have to do is pay attention to this. See, 2 strokes. And I'm using my fingers underneath to make it so that it doesn't drift on me this way. I'm using my fingers as a guide. So I see myself down near that pencil line. I'll back up now. I'm going to take and do it totally different. I'm going to hold the bow of the plane off to the right a little bit more, and I've got my fingers under the very forward end of it here, and the blade is not hanging over the pencil line on the edge of the plank. I'm only going to be able to plane up to this line. So I don't have to watch that. I only have to watch the line in front of me. And when that line starts to fade out just a tiny bit, I'm done. Once I get close to both lines, and I'm starting to split both lines right down the middle, I can reduce the blade depth on my plane a little tiny bit and then span right across the whole thing with the plane and get the surface nice and flat. So there's the 2 edges right there. Okay, so that's just prepped up to go on this side. We're back on our binder strake. This is the first binder strake we put on the boat. This is actually the starboard side right here. And like the other planks, it's made in 2 pieces because it's got quite a curvature in it, and it's got a scarf in here 6 inches long, 1/2 an inch thick. And it's glued together with TotalBoat 2-to-1 epoxy, and I glued it together yesterday and let it sit overnight, and I'm sure it's ready to go. So I can take the clamps off of that anytime I want, and I'm going to take it to the bench and clean up the scarf a little bit, and then we're going to bed the plank on and screw it on. I wanted to show you this again. We've made this scarf and glued it together on the boat. And it's real important because if that scarf was 1 degree off this way here, the plank wouldn't fit at all. You don't have the luxury in this type of a boat, plank like this, to be able to edge set the planking because the planking is so wide. If the planking was very narrow, you could edge set the planking, and it probably wouldn't matter if that was the tiniest little bit off or something along those lines. But basically, with this type of planking, you can't allow that to happen. You know, so basically, I've clamped it together and glued it on board the boat, and now I'm going to take it off and clean it up and then bed it back on. Now I'm going to take my electric plane again, and I'm going to plane that overlap, you know, the scarf there, because I've got a little bit of excess material, only about 1/16 of an inch. It's hanging over maybe 1/2 an inch past where it has to be, but I don't want to have it fall short, so I just make it a little tiny bit long and plane off the excess. Now I'm just going to grab another plank or another piece of material and put it underneath that one so that it hangs over the edge. That makes my block plane work a lot better. And I'm going to plane right through that joint right there, right through that scarf on the edge, just to clean it up nice and clean. Now I can feel it planed all the way through. I'm just going to step on one end and sight it a little bit. Oh, that looks nice, real nice. That's good. Then I'm just going to take my block plane and plane that excess glue off the overlap angle. Now I could probably do that with the electric plane, but I've already got that block plane in my hand, so I'm just going to use it. It might take a few more passes, but it'll do the trick. All right, now I'm going to move this over this way so I can set my plane on the bench. Now let's sight it through there. Oh, that looks pretty good through there too, but there is like a little hump in it right in here. I'm going to take a little bit of material right out of here. Just like that. And that's it. Now, I'm going to flip it over and just check out the other side. The other side's pretty clean, but now I'm going to clean this side up, and I'm going to use my block plane the same as I did on the other side. This side, just a little bit of extra glue here and there, and a slight overlap. There's a slight overlap right here that I'm going to try to plane off of there. It's very, very small, and it's small enough that I can just pick up my block plane and take care of it with a block plane. I mean, I could go at it with electric plane, but there's really no need to. I just want to show you that all of this work can be done by hand, but, you know, there's an advantage to using electric power when you can. Then I'm going to bring the plank over to the boat and give it one more test fit, and it really isn't to see whether or not it fits, because I already know it fits reasonably well. The idea here is to get like a clamping procedure down, because at this point I'm not dealing with two pieces of plank, I'm dealing with one big long one. So once I get the bedding in place, you know, it's going to be impossible for me to come up with a new clamping technique. I want to have it figured out before I approach the boat with this thing. And I'm pretty certain that the best thing for me to do is to clamp it in the very center, because that just leaves the two ends kind of running wild. And I've got like a mark in the middle to coordinate myself, so I can bring it up to that mark, clamp it on in the middle, and then go to either end, you know, whether it's the forward end or the after end, and clamp either end down. Now I'm going to apply poly-sulfide to the face of the transom where the plank bears up against it, and I'm just going to draw 4 beads on there. There's no need to spread it around or do anything like that, because the pressure of the plank will spread it around all by itself. I'm also going to apply poly-sulfide to the face of the stem, and then I'm going to put 2 beads in the overlap where the one plank overlaps the other. Now I use poly-sulfide. I like it because I like the color of it basically, and it doesn't skin over too fast. So, you know, I don't want to make this be black or white. I want it to be brown, so that's what I've picked right here. Another reason why I like to use poly-sulfide is because in a couple of days it's really gone off, and you can speed up the cure time by adding a little bit of moisture to it. It seems that it's hydrogen cure. You know, I've always used poly-sulfide to do all the bedding compound on skiffs and different dories and things like that. But, you know, you can use any kind of bedding. I've actually done some with, you know, polyurethane, and some with the bedding that Jamestown sells, and it all works just as well. The actually only reason I'm using poly-sulfide right here is because it comes in brown. There, I've finished clamping it into position, and I'm going to start screwing it down, but I don't want to screw the ends down first. What I want to do is start in the middle and fasten my way that way, in case it's got like a hump in it, because if it has any kind of a hump in it, or we squash the bedding down, it actually makes the plank get a little bit longer on the boat. So what we want to do is fasten away from the center out towards both ends, and I've got my drill right here and my fastenings, and I'm going to drive them with this little bit brace right here. So we're almost ready to go. The other thing I wanted to show you is that I've marked the center of the frames with a pencil as close to the edge of this plank as I could, and I'm going to transfer that mark down onto this plank and draw a little line right here. My drill hole is going to be on that mark about a ½ inch down, like that right there. Now that the plank is in position, I'm going to start fastening it down, and the only availability I have here is to fasten it to the plastic frames. I'm going to screw fasten it to the plastic frames with 1¼ inch by 6 screws, and I've got a tapered drill bit here. It doesn't require an awful lot of hole in the plastic because the screw will force its way into the plastic really easily. The plastic's got a tremendous ability to hold screws, so they're not going to back out or pull out or do anything wrong like that. And I'm using the full thickness of the plastic. I'm almost winding these screws all the way through the plastic. You can actually see them from the inside, you know, whether they come to the surface or they don't. If they come to the surface, I'll grind the tip of it off a little tiny bit with a grinder, and if they don't, you can actually see it down in the plastic frame. But the challenge to trying to rivet it is that the boat is upside down. You'd have to keep crawling underneath it to put the rove on. It just isn't going to happen. You don't rivet boats like this until they're upside right or right side up. So that's what we're going to do later on, is add rivets between the screws or between the frames. So we're working our way along from the center towards the bow and towards the stern, and you can see that I'm adding a clamp every time I put a screw in. I want to make sure that that plastic frame is pulled down really nice and tightly, because it's a twisted frame really, and one edge wants to rise up a little tiny bit if you let it, and I'm just not going to let it because I want it to look nice and neat when we flip it over. So we're making sure that we've got that clamp up there nice and tight. It's right up close to where we're driving the screw, and I know that that's got the frame bearing down tightly against the planking. Now we're up forward, and I'm sighting down from above, and I'm trying to get a line that represents the very extreme end of the stem, or the extreme end of the boat right here, onto the outside of the planking. So I just can sight inside out, and it's kind of like an estimation, but it's fairly close. And then I'm going to draw another line, maybe 3/4 inch aft of that, and that's going to be where I drive the screws. You've got to be really careful here, because you don't want to get the screws too close to the end, you know, or anything like that. Or you could come out of the surface of the back side of the stem, or make some kind of a mistake like that. So it's really beneficial to be careful right here. I'm using the same drill bit up forward here that I used to drill holes in the plastic, but I had it set a little bit short, so I'm going to chase that hole with another drill bit. That just makes it so that I avoid having to adjust that drill bit back and forth all the time. I've got to make that hole a little deeper into the oak here, because otherwise there'd be a little bit too much resistance on the screws, and I could take a chance on spinning them off or breaking them off while they're screwing down tight. Just because I've got 5 screws in a row here, and for demonstration purposes, I'm just using an electric drill here to drive the screws this time. We're doing the same thing here at the transom, although we drilled the deeper holes first. No difference really at all, but you're going to be extra careful here at the transom, because you've got kind of a radical angle here where the plank meets the transom, and you could very easily run the screws out the inside of the transom. So you just got to be very careful. And I'm not putting the screws in at 90 degrees to the plank at all on this particular position. I've got them angled kind of parallel to the transom. Now I've got a little scrap of wood here, and I'm just continuing a line down on the outside here in line with the frame, because I'm going to put one more screw right in here, and I want to make sure that I get it dead center in the frame, or as close as I can get it, because the screws go almost all the way through the plastic frames, and you can actually see them on the inside of the boat. So we want to make sure they're somewhere near the center at least, but this will do just that. Now I'm going to measure up 3 inches from that batten that I've got on the frames and make a mark, and that's where we're going to put our screws, right there. Now we're going to get started adding one more screw in the plank at each frame, and the idea of that is to hold the frames in position. Right now the frames are being held into position by the zip ties that I've got going around the frames and through the batten, and it's done a great job. You have to hold those frames like that, because they'd wander all over the place. I've set the distance from the molds actually by measuring, and I've got them right where I want them. I don't want them to move. Once those screws are in, I'm able to remove that batten, because those screws will hold the frames into position. And I'm actually going to take that same batten and move it up to the next line-off line for making the next pattern. Well, there's the first binder strake we've got it fastened in place, and it worked out pretty well. I put a couple screws in it. This is just to train the frames from moving front to back inside. That's the reason why I put that screw. It probably would have been sufficient just to put screws at the laps, but I've added one extra screw. I've got 5 screws holding the forward end of it down right here. They're 1¼ inch by 6, and that's plenty. So there it is right there. Now, I've had my difficulties with it because when I designed the molds, I actually knew way back when I designed the molds I was going to have a little bit of trouble clamping the planking onto the molds, because the angles of the inside of the molds just don't represent a line that's parallel to the planking. And I could have built it that way, but it would have been a lot more difficult for me to do it, so I decided, well, I'll just scrap that out. And I've struggled with it a little bit, trying to use those big bulky clamps holding the planks on and different things like that. It doesn't work out really, really well. I mean, it worked for me, but I'd rather do something a little bit differently, and I've come up with a different system, you know. There's numbers of different problems. Clamping to the frames is a little bit difficult because the frames are so slippery. So your clamps can slip right off the frames and different things like that. So I've come up with this system. I'm going to take some pieces of aluminum angle and screw them to the side of the molds so that I can use these vice grip style clamps and be able to clamp onto those aluminum brackets that are fastened to the molds. So you're going to get a look at that next week, because I'm not even going to put one more plank on it until I change my system. I've had it already, believe me. I know when I'm struggling, and I've been struggling a tiny bit. You know, the boat has been, I have to say, over-designed a tiny bit, and I've struggled a little bit really from the beginning. I mean, you don't see it as a struggle maybe, but I do actually. So I'm going to improve matters a little bit, and the other thing I wanted to say to you is that we've got a couple of engagements that I want to make you aware of. We're going to be at the Wooden Boat Show in Mystic, Connecticut, and we've also got an engagement in Concepcion, Chile, at the University of Concepcion. We're going to go down there and learn a little bit about their wooden boat building, and travel around a little bit and visit a few boat yards. We're also going to do a little speaking at the university to speak about what we've seen and maybe about my experiences in boat work around here. So that's pretty interesting. We're going to take you guys along with us because we're going to be making videos down there when we do it. So, you know, I wouldn't recommend that you miss that, because this is really going to be something else right here. All the way to Concepcion, Chile. I think something like 6,000 miles in order to do this one. So we're anxious to do it, and I'd have to say that some of those engagements really don't come to us and wouldn't come to us if we weren't doing these videos. So the videography and the social media that we've been using has been working really, really well, and we're happy the audience loves us, and stick with us because we're going to keep going.